Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the fourth oral taping of history. I'm Barbara Cecil, and we have another distinguished panel of guests, and they are going to talk about Laura today. So we'll get started, and I will introduce our first speaker, Gale Honeyman, who's lived in Laura for a long time, and he will start. Gale?
Actually, I was born in Laura. Laura is on the property of Thomas and Mary Thompson McCool, who came from South Carolina in 1807 and settled where Dr. Randolph's home is now. On the eastern portion of their farm in 1852, Laura was formed. And lot by lot in the old part of town along what was then the Greenville to Milton toll pike, which is now State Route 571, in the old part of town, is where all the houses were built up until about 1882 when the railroad came through the southern portion of town, and from there, one by one, homes were built on down South Main Street to meet the railroad. When I was putting together the bicentennial history of Laura, Wilbur Mote provided a newspaper article that had been published in one of the Dayton newspapers in 1936. And at that point, there were only 6 men who were working outside of the village. Everyone else had employment within the village. And as I was putting the book together, I discovered that almost every lot in town at one time had a business on it. Some were very short-lived, others were a bit longer-lived. Let's see, the house up next to you, Wilma Dean, to the north of you, that was traded for a horse and buggy, that lot and the lot on up then where the 4 units are built together. I thought that was kind of interesting that...
Candy Grissom's.
Yes, Candy Grissom's home, yes. In 1929, my grandfather, Harold Spittler, started a fur shop. And it was at the end of the Pittsburgh Road on 721, where Jenny Fenner lives now. And he started it in the strip shed. And 4 years later, his business had grown to a point that he realized that the strip shed wasn't large enough. So he came into West Milton and came to the bank and rented a building that had been foreclosed on during the Depression. He set up business there, and just a few years later bought the location. It was a hotel, the upper floors of it, at the corner of Pike and North Main Street. And in 1938, he built a fur storage vault there that adjoined it. And I'm told that today that is considered the largest fur storage vault in the Midwest, and the current owners have, in conversation with them, have informed me of that. Granddad sold that in 1945 to Ho Broark, and interestingly, from 1929 to 2010, the business is still thriving. It's probably, and not probably, it is the longest surviving business in Laura. Ho took the business over and added to that furniture store. He became very, very successful with his venture. A few years ago, you talked to anybody in the Miami Valley and they knew about Roark's Furs and Roark's Furniture. After Granddad sold the fur shop in 45, he bought the building across the street, which is now the Laura Hall, and established there a Kaiser Frazer dealership. It had been previously built by Ward Jones and for his Chevrolet dealership. And he unfortunately, during the Depression, lost that business also. And then later was able to establish another Chevrolet dealership out on the edge of town. I have some pretty good memories of the canneries in town. The Laura Canning Company on the south side of town, there were times I was down there sort of swiping tomatoes and swiping those little balls of salt and sticking them in the tomatoes. Oh, that was wonderful. And then when I was about 14, I actually had a job there. There were huge vats, probably like so, that the cans were placed in and then put into the cookers to can them. Well, my job was wearing this big glove, reaching in and pulling the cans out, trying not to get burned around the edge of that container. And my mother worked at the Tip Top cannery, which was out on the edge of town. Mary Netzley had started that in 1937, and I well remember being there and watching the ladies on that line peeling those tomatoes. And actually they had it was a little bit of a scoop that they used, and that would take the core out, and they just took their hands, went this way, and the skin was gone from the tomato. And they placed those tomatoes on trays, and then each tray you filled, that was how you earned your money, was by the tray. My home is, there's one home in between, and now there's an empty lot there, but Carroll, Babe Carroll, followed his father in business there. He had a general store. And while I don't really remember that too well, because I was very small when they were there, the only remembrance I have of that is on one Sunday afternoon, they weren't home, and my younger brother and I, and we weren't in school yet, but we went over on the back porch of that house and got their toys out and started playing with them. And I recall that my mother decided that was not a good idea, and we had to go apologize for that. Well, the next door to them was the general store, and I remember Roy quite well back in the meat market, and he would go back into the cooler and bring out a slab of meat, and he would grind up your hamburger, or he would slice down whatever cut of meat that you wanted. And at that, while he had it still, there were still things left over that had been in the general store. And occasionally someone would come in and want to buy something that was quite left over. The mode elevator at the south end of town was a very busy concern. It was put in 1911, and October the 6th, 1952, it caught fire and burned to the ground. And while it burned, the train station burned with it. And after that, what the leftover of the train station was a boxcar that was set on the opposite side of of Main Street. My mother, when I was at the age to start Cub Scouts, there were, I think, 7 of us boys the same age. So she decided that we needed a Cub Scout troop, and she became our den mother. And from that, then, the same group of boys went into Boy Scouts and Explorer Scouts, and the troop was there in Laura. And my father told me that when he was a young man that there had been a troop there, but it had elapsed from the time he was a young man and then until the time I was starting into my teen years. And I think that's about all I want to say right now, and I'd like to introduce Gene Baker.
Well, I lived a half a mile south of Laura on a farm on Wright Road. And when I got old enough to go to school, I walked to school in Laura. I went to school for 8 years in Laura in the 3-room schoolhouse they had there. And, yeah, there's a picture of it.
And you might be sitting here in one of these little pupils.
And there was, the first, second, and third grade was in one room, the fourth, fifth was in another room, and the sixth, seventh, and eighth was in the other room. And my teachers was Corey Eisenbarger for the first 3 grades, Anita Minnick from West Melton in the next 2 grades, and Frank Moat taught the 6th, 7th, and 8th grades. And starting from the south end of Laura, at the top of the hill on the left side of the street was the post office. Inside of that was a pool hall. On the opposite corner of the street was a grocery store. And up the street about halfway was Carol's store. Ardine Carroll run that. And across the street from that was a cream station. This old cream there. And right next to that, Pedmode had a milk station where you could go and buy milk. You can't do that nowadays either. And up the next corner was a hardware store. I bought my first baseball glove in that hardware store. I was about 10, 12 years old, I guess. Then on up the street at the next corner of Pike and Main Street was Ward Jones's Chevrolet garage. Across from that was another general store. And up above that was the telephone exchange. My 2 sisters both worked at that telephone exchange where they plugged in. I was up there with my sister a few times. Every time a call would come in, they'd have to plug it in. And it was very interesting. Then catty corner across the street from that was the Green Lantern. Lucille Jones had a little restaurant there called the Green Lantern. And later on, when Rourke started building, he built onto that building, and it was part of his furniture store. And on the other side of the street, on the right side, there was a little church called the Mission. Those people there, when they went to church, they really got happy. I think a few times I never seen it, but I heard about it. They'd get happy and throw songbooks. The kids like to congregate outside and watch. And then clear up at the end of the old part of town was Willis Swank's Ice House. We'd go there in the summertime, get ready to make ice cream. We'd have to go to Willis Swank's and get a chunk of ice. We make ice cream. And I guess that's about the end of my. Of course, when I got big enough, I bought a pair of roller skates. I'd start down at the railroad track and put on my roller skates, and I'd skate to school. And in the evening, I'd put my skates on and skate back to as far as I could go, and then take my skates off and walk home. I've done that for, let's see, 14 years, I guess. That's about all I can remember about Laura. I'll turn my speech over to my wife, Jean.
Well, there was no, oh, louder?
Speak to that.
Oh, in here? We live on Chestnut Street, and as you come in off of 571, you go into Pike Street, and Chestnut is the first street south. And there was no buildings on the east end of Chestnut Street. There was one house, and that was clear down at the other end on 2nd Street. My grandmother owned the land there from Pike down to almost 2nd Street. There was nothing there but a large barn. My grandmother had raised chickens. So when my parents got married and had a family, Daddy got a cow. And that was our duty to milk that cow morning and evening. And now then, there's 9 houses on Chestnut, and to the back of our lot, there was ball field. And then the ball field, they did away with that, and then they, our Sunday school class raised tomatoes for several years back there. But to me, the change was so drastic then and now. But another louder. Another memory was the minstrels that they used to put on. Mother was the director. Mother and her brother, Roger, they started up the minstrel, and they had the first one above Carol's store. And then they had 2 or 3, I have the programs here. They had, it was very successful. They had the 3 at Milton Union High School. And I'm sure we wouldn't be able to do that today. I was hoping that Elmer Swank would be here because he was one of the Inman, and he was called Lop-Ear. And I was curious to know whether he remembered that. Oh, there's a lot of memories, but my mind isn't as good as it was. So I'll introduce Alice Beck.
Yes, I'm Alice, and I've lived in Laura all my life. I was born there, and the house I live in now, I was about 12 years old when we moved there. So I've lived there quite a few years. Sounds to me like all the good times was before my time. There wasn't that much action going on that I actually remember. But some of the things I do remember is I remember at Halloween, as a kid growing up, we'd get together, and the first place we headed was Ines Hunt's. We're going to get that popcorn ball. After we left there, we went to to Lowell Hunt's for another popcorn ball, and we ended up at Wilma Dean's for her popcorn ball. And to this day, they still run to Wilma Dean's for those delicious popcorn balls. That I really remember. I also remember at the back of the old school that they talked about, we had movies. We'd take our blankets or a chair and we'd sit out there and watch the movies on the back of the school and eat popcorn. Also, there at the park, there is like a rink there, and they used to on Saturday night have skating parties. I think it was probably put on by auxiliary firemen or someone, I'm not sure, or sometimes they had dances there. And as a kid, we had a ball doing that. Gale mentioned the cannery and the tomatoes. Yes, that was one of the things that we would do. We'd run down there and we'd swipe a tomato out of one of the hampers. And one time we'd go inside the building to get our salt balls. And I can remember one time we got caught, and we were told, I don't mind you stealing my tomatoes, but please don't steal my salt balls. He didn't like us going in there and getting those salt balls. And another thing that I remember is when I was a little older, the old-fashioned days that we had there in town and the parades, and we had one big gigantic parade, which I remember, and if anybody like, I got pictures of that parade that went through town. That was interesting. And up at the north end of town, there was a filling station. Barton's had run it, and then Joy Kane had it. And he served sandwiches and milkshakes. And I can remember going up there to get a milkshake. And at that time, it was the best milkshake you ever had. You know, it was just a small place, someplace for us to run and get. I think it was sad that they tore down the old school. I believe it was in 1967, but those things happen. And I remember going to the bakery at the south end of town that was run by Cleo Swank, and going in there, and I always felt like when we went in there, they didn't particularly like us kids in there, because they would tell us, get what you want and get out. And sometimes, you know, you were scared to go in there with your quarter or whatever you might have. And at the south end of town, when Gale mentioned the railroad station, I remember the water trough that was there, that they used to feed their horses, and we would go down there and get a drink. And I remember that. There's not a whole lot in my time and that I actually remember. I've heard a lot of things about the olden days and all the things. Wilma Dean has told me a lot. Sounds like there was a lot going on. Things are different today than they were back then. I also remember when I was growing up, if there was an elder person, I was taught to call them Grandma and Grandpas. So I had all kinds of grandmas and grandpas. I had Grandma Young, Grandma Warner, Grandpa Pemberton, Grandpa Hellman. People will say, were they your grandpas? No, that was just what we were taught to call them. And I remember Grandma Young lived in front of us at the time, and we used to love to go over there and sit on the porch with her and just talk and talk. And she always had the stick pretzels. And if it was in the fall, they were warm stick pretzels. And I really enjoyed that. And I think now I'll turn it over to Wilma Dean.
Mine's a little different. I wrote down all the things that I can remember when I was a kid. And you can't believe what was in Laura unless you read the books. So I started at the north end of town at the KP Hall, Willis Swank's store and ice house. Luther Westfall had a blacksmith shop. Paul Barton had the station, then Bob Blaisher, and then Joy King. And then there was the little I called it the Nazarene Church. It was on Main Street, clear at the end, yeah. And then the schoolhouse, and I went there through the 8th grade. And like Alice, the main thing was the movies on this side of the schoolhouse. Let's see, and then Ching Netzley, across the street from where I live now, Ching Netzley had a barber shop. And Ward Jones had the garage, he built the house, and Lucille, the Green Lantern restaurant. And then across the street from him was another store, and I don't know what that was called. But the telephone exchange was upstairs, and we got to, I remember Alma Brown and Ruth Brown and Mildred Sarver worked at the exchange. Okay, then then the Fairhouse was on Pike Street, and the church was on the corner where we went to Sunday school, and then was Walter Steiner's gravel pit, and the little hardware store was George Moyer, and I bought my first pair of skates there, and the only pair. And then was Ardine and Babe Carroll's store, and Lee Guy had a barber shop on the north end of his store. And then upstairs was where they had the minstrel, And the thing I remember about that was Elmer Netzley saying, what did I say it was? Well, a Negro spiritual of some kind. I could remember Elmer, mostly. And then on down was across the street from Babe Carroll's was the cream station. And later years, they tore that down, and my dad helped move the post office from the south end up there at that place. And then there was Grant Stricker had a shop in the back of his lot, and he made tin things. And Harry Waymeyer had a garage, and Thea Christian had a blacksmith there. Walter Jones had the canning factory. And then on down was Clark Mote's elevator, the train station, which Candy Grissom, I remember Candy and Austin Furlong pushing the mail up to the post office twice a day, morning and evening. And then on below the depot, on the right side at the end of town, was Ped Mote's dairy farm. He sold milk. And that's how, I think Mom worked in the cream station for him. And then we had the coal yard, the lumber yard, and up by Clark Mote's house was a building, was the post office. And then there was a building there that Granville Wagner sold stoves and anything else I don't remember. And where the Laurel Circle is now, like Jean said, was a ball field. And across from there was a filling station, and I think if I remember right, it was Mac McClanahan run the filling station. And right beyond that was the dance hall, the Maples. And that's what I remember about Laura.
What's some more about the Maples dance hall? I've never heard that.
It's right outside of town east, the first place out of town on the east. What was their name, Jean? What was their names? I don't remember who had it now, but it was out there for years.
And they had dances on the weekends, I mean, it was open.
Yeah, they used to have big times there.
Yeah, Saturday night especially.
Saturday nights, yeah.
We wasn't allowed to go there.
They had taken a barn and remodeled it.
Yeah,
And
it was
held
in a
that
barn. Yeah,
Yeah.
it was in a barn.
Yvette Kings lived there for a long time after
Yeah.
that.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's like I say, there was a lot going on before my time,
Right, right.
but that was all gone, you
Sure.
know. There was a few things left, but not too many.
I think what happened by the time we were teenagers, that was the wind down. There were some things left, but by the time we were teenagers, almost everything was gone.
Gone.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Wasn't too much left.
Yeah.
Well, I remember that all the barns in town, 'cause almost every house had a barn on the lot.
Right.
Oh,
Our
no.
property where I live now had a big barn and another smaller building and a chicken house. It was like a little farmland there,
Yes.
and those were tore down
Right,
after we moved there shortly, but yeah, we had all that.
Most of them were 2 stories, and they were built with, for hay in the loft and for horse stalls. Ours had a blacksmith shop built onto the side of that yet.
Nobody, she was the.
Mother, remember that place up at the north end? You said something about the men would go there and do whatever they did, and the women,
KP Hall.
yeah, tell about that.
Well, I was never allowed to go there. The women before my time, it's in the books, I don't know who they were, went in there and knocked the place to pieces. Because their men spent time there playing cards and drinking, I guess. And that's in,
That wasn't the KP Hall, that was the building next
Next
door
to
to the
it.
KP Hall.
oh, it was?
Yes,
Yeah.
and it was a saloon. They established that saloon at the
Okay.
same time that they put the railroad through. And the ladies were upset because their
Yeah.
men would work on the railroad and then go straight up to the saloon, and they
Yeah.
weren't coming home.
Well, to add to that, they played pool, I was told there, and Grandpa Pemberton, which is really not my grandpa, but give me the cue ball that the women stole from this pool hall, and I do have the cue ball from where the women took the cue ball away.
You got more than we.
Every home had a little house out back of it with a moon in the door. And the kids like, at Halloween time, they like to turn those over. And I remember Vince Daniels lived at the end
Yeah,
of
South.
Pike Street, of Chestnut Street, rather. And they turned his over, and he was in it one night. And he couldn't get out. He turned it right on the
Petey
door.
Newman took the same tumble right over on the door.
Back to that, talking about the little houses with the moon, I was older, but I can remember there was still some left, and it wasn't the kids that took them. It
No.
was adults.
Yeah.
They would bring them in here to West Milton and put them down by where the bank was downtown.
Yes.
And they would sit it out there, and they did it, I know, for 2 or 3 years in a row, and those weren't kids, those were adult men.
One Halloween, they put a goat up on top of the schoolhouse. That wasn't kids either.
Well, I had a newspaper route for all the time I was in high school. It was 4 years worth of delivering the Dayton Daily News. And on Sunday mornings, in order to have time to go to church, Dad would take my brother and myself. I had the southern end of town, Elwood had the northern end of town, but Dad would put us in the car and help us to deliver the papers. And how well I remember every so far, there would be this wonderful, wonderful perked coffee aroma coming. And then occasionally there would be this, somebody was making sweet rolls. Oh, couldn't wait to get home for something. that sometimes Mother would make some sweet rolls too, and that was wonderful.
And I also remember going to Sunday school at the Christian church up on the corner, and Mary Nestle was our Sunday school teacher. And so she would have a lot of parties back at her house, and they had a big hill, and in the wintertime we would go sledding down this hill and maybe have a big campfire and roast wieners, and she always did a lot for us kids. And when my boys, I had 3 boys, and as they grew up, they still went sledding at that hill. And I believe to this day, some of the kids still go sledding down there. And that was one of the big things from my time clear to now that kids really enjoyed, was sledding down we called it the Netzley Hill. And Mary and Elmer did a lot for us kids when we were growing up. That's Bob Netzley's mom and dad, in case somebody didn't know. But we had a lot of good times with them also.
I'm surprised no one has mentioned the ball diamonds behind the schoolhouse.
Yeah, playing ball.
Yes,
Yeah.
there were lights, there were a lot of night games played there, and that went on for a number of years.
But I can remember, they mentioned Roarks, and in the cannery, I can remember growing up when I was small, my mom would work at the cannery factory also, and then as my sister, which was a lot older than me, she worked there, and I always thought, when I grow up, I'm going to work there. But by the time I was old enough, maybe like Gale, to work there, I didn't want no part of that. So I went to Rourke, and he gave me a job, and I dusted the furniture in the bedroom department when I was probably 15 or 14 to make some money. But I didn't want no part of that cannery when it was my time.
How did Laura get its name?
That's a question. There's no answer to that. It was rumored for years that it was named for the first postmaster's daughter. However, when we discovered who the first postmaster was, he had no daughter named Laura. And in doing the research that I did on town, I couldn't discover there was ever a Laura had lived there in the early days. So we don't know where it came from. It's one of the very few places named Laura in the world. I believe there's one in Australia, and that was it.
When was it actually established?
1852,
Oh, okay. That's what I thought was said, but,
yes.
I mean, West Milton's much older than.
Oh, yes.
We should probably mention Bob Netsley and Marge as well.
Right,
Yes, they were very, very prominent citizens.
citizens, right. They lived right at the edge of town, and
Well,
was this church that they built into a home.
Right. It was the old silent Quaker
Quaker
meeting
church.
house.
And as a kid growing up and through my young adulthood years, I could start at the north end of town, and I was able to tell you who lived in every house, what their names were, how many kids they had, what their names were, and things have changed. Now I'm lucky to know the people that live right around me,
Right.
other than those that have been there for years. That times have really, really changed in Laura, but it's still a nice little community, or I still wouldn't be there after 72 years.
Mention's been made of the Moyer hardware store, and I remember my mother making a comment. She and my father started housekeeping in 1938, and they went in and to buy a gas cook stove, and there was one sitting there, and it suited Mother, and she said, "Well, I'll take that." And Mr. Moyer said, "Well, I couldn't possibly sell you that stove. Somebody might come in and want to buy it." So he ordered a stove for her.
He does a good job.
Well, all small towns have some characters. Are there any?
Oh, my. We've always had characters.
When I was growing up, there was, I believe his name was Henry, but I don't remember
Yeah.
his last name, and he was a deaf mute, you know. I was always afraid of him. I thought he was different, and I don't know why, but us girls were afraid of him. But he was a nice guy, and I know when we roller skated up there, he was one of the best skaters up there. And as you got older, you weren't afraid of him anymore. I don't recall his last name, but Henry was, do you know what his last name was?
Right now, I can't think of
I can't either.
Bratzel, I think.
Yes, it was.
Bratzel.
Indeed, it was
Henry
Bratzel.
Bratzel.
Yes. How does this go? Somehow he was related to Cleo Swank.
Yeah.
And so he lived there at the bakery, and he
Yeah.
delivered bread and rolls and such out through the countryside. They had a huckster route. And my mother said when she was a young girl, Henry was considerably older, but he begged my mother to learn how to sign, because he wanted to talk to my mother. And Mother simply never learned. But she also told me that Hen could put his hand on an engine, and just by putting his hand and feeling the vibrations of that car, knew exactly what was wrong with it and how to fix it.
Wow.
But we had several, I think as a kid growing up, places on Chestnut Street, and I can't recall his name. It was down by where Kelly's lived on Chestnut, and there was a little house, and a little old man lived there
Will.
alone. We used to go there and sit and talk to him a lot.
Ingle,
Ingle, is that who it was?
was it? Ingle? Mary
He was-
Netsley's brother.
No, he was an Eller. And he lived up in Alaska, and he moved
I
back.
remember him.
He was Rita Gibbs's uncle.
But we used to take our comic books down to him, and he would give us a nickel or something for one of our comic books. But I enjoyed it, and some of the other girls, we'd go there. But when I moved to where I live now, like I said, I think I was approximately 12 years old. Beside us, where the post office is now, was a little old man named Jimmy Carroll. And at first I was sort of afraid of him too, but he got to be a nice guy. And I know my dad, we would take him Christmas dinner about every year after we lived there and give him his dinner because he had no one. And it seems like we had quite a few back then of people that lived alone, that why us young girls, or some of the boys, that was mostly us girls, would go and sit with them and talk to them. But we really enjoyed that, and you don't see that so much today, as everybody don't have time, I guess. And
You remember Albert Netsley that lived in the school bus?
Yeah, in the
out on
school bus,
curve?
yes,
Okay.
yeah,
He was eccentric.
yeah.
Yeah. And Al Cal
Yeah. Al Cow.
lived behind where Gosling's now are now, and lived in that little garage, and he was a tinkerer.
Yeah.
And you would go into his home, and it was very small, but there was just a little area that he had for work space, and the rest was packed full of his possessions.
And I remember Lydia and Joe Lazier that lived across the street. That is where our new city building is right now. We used to go sit on the porch with them, and I think Gale made a lot of trips over there to talk to them too. But before I lived where I live at the present, we lived short, it had a street, it was called Short Street, and the house is no longer there. That Hope Rourke had bought the property out and built a big building there. Wilma Dean, of all the things that Wilma Dean can remember, and she remembers an awful lot, she cannot remember that house. She can't remember me living there, but yet her daughter, Yola Vaughn, would come over and play in my backyard with me when we were young. And she can't remember that.
place that
But the living room was the old post office that had been at the south end of town. And when I lived there, I don't know if I wasn't allowed to go too far, but prior to that, I don't remember. I remember staying in that area until we moved and went to where we're at now. I didn't know a lot of things that went on other than in that particular area, and I just thought it was interesting that Wilma Dean can't remember that house.
I hope somebody's got a picture someday. Comes up with a picture of it.
My grandfather moved that post office up there and built the house, but that our family does not have a photograph of it.
And I have a partial picture, but
Mother, you've talked before about when, I guess people called them tramps during the Depression, would get off the train. I guess they rode the trains. Can you tell a little bit about
Well,
that, how
just
people would feed them?
Different women, I'm sure Helen, because she lived at Jean's mother, they would feed them. And Pop would take them, my dad would take them up to Firehouse and let them stay all night in the winter. They weren't afraid back then. There's nothing to be afraid of. They did do that, yeah.
You're mentioning that. I heard the story that one of the men from there in town was kind of a tramp in his own way and was pretty unkempt. And some of the men there in town kind of kidnapped him one night, in a sense, took him to the firehouse, stripped him down, and hosed him off. He was pretty smelly, apparently. My father told that story.
I don't remember that.
I remember that.
I don't remember this, but Leo, my husband, he was 3 years older than I was. And Jim Grissom and John Hahn and Leo, and there's another boy, and I can't remember, they burned a cross. The Ku Klux Klan burned a cross in Elmer Hahn's east of town, right there at his farm. And the boys went out and laid in the side ditch a little bit to see that. And that's true, that did happen, but I didn't see it, but Leo did. Yeah. And there's no pictures, I'll bet of that. Yeah.
Go ahead.
I just had a question I wanted to ask. My family was talking about this. I was talking with the boys, and we were talking about the different groceries and stuff. And I said there was a Bunny Swank that ran the bakery. I didn't hear anybody mention that name. So
I said Cleo, and it was Bunny and
Bunny.
Cleo.
Yeah.
Bunny Swank?
Yeah,
Yes.
Bunny and Cleo Swank, yeah.
I remember going there when I was just a very small child with some pennies, and I don't recall exactly how many, 3, 4, 5, 6, and buying a loaf of bread. And the way they baked the bread was in a wide pan. It was a double loaf. It had the
Yeah.
dent in the middle. My mother would send me down there to buy bread occasionally.
What's the history behind where the Tall Tales is?
That's not a very long history. That goes back into the 50s, I believe.
Probably,
And-
somewhere around there.
And Hobe Roark had quite a number of employees with his restaurant. And he asked Mrs. Coate, who, the Coate
Betsy
vaults.
Coate, wasn't it?
No, the Coate vaults. Here,
Cecil Liddy.
Liddy, asked
Liddy,
Liddy if
yeah.
she would consider putting a restaurant in there or managing a restaurant there if he put the building up. So that had been a vacant lot. My parents actually truck farmed that for quite a while. And, but he put that lot up and that's what started. And it's been through a number of hands since then. But it was,
Well, I can add to that a little bit, because the house we
Lived in, yeah.
was right by the lot where they put the restaurant. And I can remember Cecil coming and talking to us. And he, said, "Get home, take care of everything. And you don't have to worry about the lot there." And they did build the restaurant. And his wife, get what you say, man. Were very nice, and they always washed out for my two sons, Mark and Mike, lived there with us. But we moved away in '65, and came to the big city.
She was my Sunday school teacher. Liddy Coate. Yes, she was.
Yeah, they had a nice restaurant on there.
Before it was a restaurant, it was, and I can't think of his name. Do you, Gene? Somebody had meat, butcher shop there, sold meat first. But I can't think of his name.
Where the
Before the restaurant.
was that building still there?
It was there, yeah. And there was a meat, I can't think who he was, but you could go there and buy meat. Do you remember that, Gene?
Are you talking about where the restaurant is?
Yeah, yeah.
I don't.
Huh?
If you're talking about the one that Cecil Coate built, are you talking about that place?
The restaurant that's there now?
Yeah, but did he build? Okay, I might be wrong, but there was something in there before a restaurant was.
What?
I got some literature at home. I'll go home and see if I can
Wasn't
find.
any property there when we bought our house?
Yours?
From Perkins. There was-
I was gonna say, Herkins lived there.
Yeah, right,
Kenny's mother and dad
right.
Alice.
lived there before the restaurant.
Alice and, what was his name? Herkins. Alice Herkins and Frank
Frank
yes.
Herkins. Frank,
lived there first.
Yes.
Yeah, where Gene lived.
yes,
Yes.
yes.
Yeah, yeah,
We bought it from
yeah.
So I want to ask a question. You all went to school in Lara until the 8th grade, and then did you come into West Melton?
Yeah.
Then to, for your high school years?
Gene did. Gene
Okay.
went to,
Franklin Monroe.
Okay.
They had this big fight going on.
mhm.
Okay.
And,
Who had the fight going on? West Melton and Franklin Monroe?
no,
No.
West
Laura.
Melton and the
Laura,
outer
Potsdam, and
Potsdam,
Ludlow.
Laura, and Ludlow Falls.
Okay, okay.
And
Yeah.
my father worked for
Clark Moot.
Clark Moat, and he is the one that paid our tuition and the bus, and we rode the bus to Franklin Monroe, or I did, for 3 years.
Instead of coming to West Melton?
Right, I came to West Mountain my sophomore year.
Didn't Bob Nestle go to Franklin Monroe with
Yeah.
you?
Yes.
Because Bob
There-
Nestle went to Franklin Monroe also.
He
Okay.
graduated from Franklin Monroe.
Okay, there's, actually, well, it would have been Monroe School, because the Franklin wasn't combined
Yes,
at the
yes.
time. There's an underlying story with this, and it's an unfortunate story. The school board here in West Melton wanted to build a new school, and they wanted to consolidate Ludlow, Laura, and Potsdam into the school. And the outside schools were not too much in favor of busing their children into West Milton. And my father was custodian of the Laura School in 1937.
Yeah.
And the Thanksgiving holiday came by. And on Monday morning, Dad went in and stoke the fires and discovered that all of the seats had been pulled up, ripped up actually from the floor. And he was told then later that the same had happened in the schools in Ludlow and Potsdam. And because of that incident, there for many years was an anxiety about West Milton.
Okay.
Dad said that prior to that incident, when folks, well, on Saturday night, the sidewalks in West Milton were so jammed with people that they actually spilled out into the street because there were too many people. And after that incident, that Thanksgiving incident, the business area here in West Milton suffered because of the incident. And it caused a great deal of animosity. And it's one of the reasons that for many years, anything that had to do with tax levies in the school had trouble passing. It's a story that really hasn't been told, but it definitely happened. I telephoned my aunt before I came. She's one of the students that was bused up to Monroe School and graduated from there. But almost all of the high school students from Laura were bused up to Monroe rather than coming to West Milton because of that incident of the seats being ripped up. It just was not handled correctly. It caused a lot of hard feelings.
Sure.
Well, Larry has a question.
Where does Sam Paul live?
Who?
Sam Paul, you know, the guy with the great big, with the white mane of hair.
He lived on,
Had a real deep voice.
he lived on 721, just before you go down the hill, going towards Potsdam, on the left side of the road.
At just about Hall Road.
But he didn't live in town. He lived
No.
No, he
I
lived,
just remember him having this big white
Yeah.
mane of hair and real deep voice.
there used to be a little schoolhouse set there on the right side of the road there.
And never saw Sam without coveralls.
Oh,
So is the schoolhouse still standing?
No,
No,
the
it's-
schoolhouse was
it's
torn
gone.
down.
Okay.
And
it's
they,
called Moss Hill.
Okay.
oh, no, school, and you mean in Laura?
Yes,
No.
yes.
Okay.
Oh, yeah, the Laura Schoolhouse is
Yeah,
gone.
that was torn down in,
It was 3
67?
rooms.
I think 67. I think
Okay.
that's about right.
Okay.
You know, it was a 3-room schoolhouse.
What's the population of Laura at this time?
487, I believe.
What was it back when Mom and you and Baby?
I have no idea.
Was it bigger?
No,
Smaller.
No, there's a lot of houses that been built now, and in the Laura Circle, that's all full.
And Ludlow Street's got
Yeah,
like
like
4 new
Jean said,
houses, and
Chestnut Street,
Chestnut Street, and
got houses.
So all those businesses, which I can't believe how many.
I can't either.
yeah.
People from Potsdam, Ludlow supported those businesses.
oh, Potsdam had a lot of business
Yeah.
too.
I think they all did.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I
But-
think they were all growing communities.
yep.
Yes.
Well, I don't know growing, but they were self-sustaining communities, and
Yeah.
the farmers would come in.
Sure.
They, to the general stores, they would bring their eggs
Yeah.
and any sort of produce that was in excess. And it was a barter system.
Sure. Everybody helped each other too, didn't they?
Everybody helped each
Yes,
other, yes.
Yes, yeah.
We didn't go no we had a great grocery store and gas stations, and the only reason we come to Milton I can think of, Evelyn Brown's dad had the shoe store and got our shoes mended there.
Buster Brown shoes.
Huh? Yeah,
Buster Brown shoes.
yeah, yeah.
Well, I just want to say, my son, Mark, told me last night when I was talking to him about this, he said, well, Mom, just say for me that when O'Rourke had his 65th birthday party, that was the biggest thing I ever seen in Laura.
That was right, that
was great.
the best boy.
Remember that, Mom? Well, yeah, I'm not as well as you.
Is that the year that he brought in some of the people off of Ruth Lyon's television show?
Yes.
He brought,
Bonnie Lou something.
yeah, they had like a festival and they put a big stage out and some of them from Ruth Lyon's Club on television he brought out. I remember that.
They had wrestling and they had.
Yeah, they had all kinds. It was really big.
They had wrestling going on.
But I think when Rourke's was really strong and gone, he brought a lot of things into town. And it's like someone said, no matter where you went, where are you from? And you'd say to Laura, oh, where Rourke's is? Everybody knowed Rourke's.
That's right.
And
That's right.
there was a lot of good times that Rourke did do things there.
Yeah, Pete Fenner used to wrestle up there.
I was thinking
Yeah.
the same
Virginia's
thing.
husband. Yeah,
What'd they call him?
I don't know.
They had a name.
Yeah, they
for
had a
him,
name for him.
But I don't know.
I don't remember what it was either.
This is just local people that wrestle each other, they brought people in.
They brought,
Brought people in.
sometimes they brought them in. Pete was the only local one I knew of that wrestled.
Where was this that they had the ring set up and everything?
There,
Out in the
Yeah.
middle of the street, wasn't it?
Yeah, they
Right
put
out
right
in
in the
Rourke's
street,
on Main
right in the
Street,
middle of the
right out in
street.
the middle of the street, up
Yeah.
uptown.
Well, sure, that was a big event for Laura.
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, Gail, you mentioned the success of the fur shop. I'm curious, how did Goldberg's get in the loop? Because they were from New York. Can somebody share about that?
When O'Rourke retired, well, actually retired when he died, I believe.
No.
No,
No.
was it well,
He
Goldberg's
bought-
came next. I know they
Yeah,
bought
and he
it.
bought it from Hobrower.
Okay.
Hope was still in
I
business
wasn't
for
quite
furniture,
sure,
wasn't
but-
he?
Yeah, he still
still
was in the
furniture.
furniture store.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's been through 5 or 6 sets of hands through the
Several,
years.
Yeah. Yeah.
But do you know, did they come here specifically to own that?
Yes, they
Yeah.
came
I don't know
from
they
New
heard
York.
about that.
They came from New York. Well, in the fur business, there is it's a community. The furs themselves all came from New York. So Laura was known because of the business being there for so long. In the fur business, it is a small community in the overall picture of it.
You still see a lot of people from far away come to
Oh,
to the
yes.
fur shop today.
Yeah.
To
My
this
my
day.
grandfather did not have a telephone, and everything was word of mouth. His clientele came from a radius of Indianapolis to Columbus, and an entire radius, all by word of mouth. My father told me, and he worked there, that during the summer season, when folks would bring the coats in, they had a work table in the showroom, and it would be piled so high that they couldn't get another coat on top of it. And it was that way every day through the summer months. Oh, and there's a little story with the fur vault. Before I started school, my brother was 2 years younger than I am, and my mother's youngest sister was just a month older than my brother. So the three of us were kind of in the vault playing, and all of a sudden it got pretty dark in there. There was one little light bulb up in the ceiling. So it was like, well, okay. We were playing tag in the fur coats. And so we just kept right on playing, but we would hide inside the fur coats. And so then the other ones, whoever was it, had to come and find us in the fur coats. It took them a while to discover that we were missing, but they had locked the vault on us.
They still use it.
They use that same vault today, don't they?
That's the same vault. And my father helped install the door on the vault. It came from a bank in Chicago, and it weighs several tons. And they actually broke the steps trying to take it up into the first shop. There's one step up, and it crumbled. So they had to rebuild that in order to get it in. And it's a very impressive door.
Wayne tells the story of his cousins, Lloyd and Floyd, taking, before the vault, they took it up ramps by the wheelbarrow loads and dumped it from the top down in. That's what he remembers.
That story I don't know.
I don't remember that.
Everybody remembers something different.
Yeah.
That's what makes it so unique to hear all of you, because everybody remembers something different.
I can't imagine them being in business today because women don't work for.
Oh, yes, they do.
They do?
Yes, indeed, they do.
Where?
Just not around here, they don't. Okay, well, go to the Schuster through the winter months. You'll see a number of fur coats on both men and women.
Yes.
You see his picture in the paper last Sunday? Schuster.
Yes.
Oh, yes.
And he also tells about going up to the garage where Lloyd and Floyd had a garage, I guess, up there.
Yes.
And how Floyd would spit tobacco up their toes when they were barefooted and tease and torment them so bad.
I can remember when Schuster performed his first open heart surgery down at Good Sam.
Oh, she worked there, yeah.
Huh. He was a heart surgeon.
Any other questions?
I do.
Yeah.
I remember, was it Bunny Swank in the bakery? That he was the maid?
Yep.
Yes.
And what was his wife's name?
Cleo.
Cleo, okay. Because they used to have they would bring their wares, they'd come to my grandma's house out on Lockman Road.
Yeah, they had a huckster wagon.
Yeah, I was trying to think of that
An old
name.
Model T Ford.
Well, I don't remember the
Delivery
car, but I
truck.
remember them coming there.
Yep.
And they called it a huckster wagon?
Yes.
Yeah.
They used to call all those kind of wagons huckster, I've heard.
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, something we've kind of ignored are the drummers. The drummers would come on the trains carrying their wares, and a drummer was just a salesman. But he would bring his wares, and then he would go door to door selling them. And I have a Singer sewing machine that my great-grandfather purchased from one of those men. He came and stayed the night with them, and he had supper, stayed the night, and when he left in the morning, he left with a horse, and my great-grandmother had the sewing machine.
Oh.
As a singer. And I have an idea there were a lot of folks that bought things that way.
Did you want something, Rena?
Well, there wasn't much said about this. To me, it's a special memory. I guess because so much of the community was always there, but when you mentioned the ball field, Gale, can you talk a little bit more, other than that it had lights? I mean, that was really a big deal.
It was.
I mean, there were always games in that concession stand. Can anybody just?
Our Sunday school class, Beck and Jean, we worked in that. I don't know where'd the building come from.
They built it.
We built the building?
Yeah.
Okay,
But you're right, I can remember
yeah.
playing ball there myself, and I remember people from other towns come there to play ball.
Yeah, I played there a
And
lot.
we did have a lot of good games, and even as a young adult, they still was playing, and I would go up and sit and watch the games, at that time I wasn't playing. But yeah, teams from all over came there and played ball, and that was maybe 2 or 3 nights a week,
Right.
and something to do. And now, there's not a whole lot going on in Laura.
Out where the
It's-
circle is now, that was a ball field too.
Yeah.
They had professional ball
Yeah.
games out there.
Really?
Oh, yeah.
My brother talked about playing ball out there, I didn't. don't
I got
remember that, but
pictures
we
of
did. My
some.
brother had
Didn't,
said that.
didn't one of the players go on into major leagues
I-
or was headed that way and maybe
Well,
didn't make
Roy
it?
Gibbs was a good ball pitcher. He went quite a ways, but he didn't get to the professional.
I think there was a story that one of them was to go professional and there was something kept him from doing it. And I can't remember.
That could have been Roy.
No, it wasn't Roy.
Wasn't Roy.
No, it was someone else.
Herb Leonard used to, Zelma's man, Herb, he
Yeah.
was a great ball player out there. So was Big Carroll.
Mhm.
I got pictures of some of them.
Well, Glenn Hart pitched a lot of ball
Yeah,
out there too.
Glenn did later, yeah,
And
Ned
Alice-
Jones?
yeah, Ned.
Yes.
Ned was a
You
softball
were saying
pitcher.
something about your brother, Beck,
Mhm.
he was telling me the other day when you talked about this, he said, well, I was pretty good at getting homers up there on that ballpark. He was
Yeah, he played a lot of ball.
talking about it, how much he enjoyed
Yeah.
that.
I talked to him here the other week, and, you know, he was telling me things that I didn't know, like the ballpark there where the Platte is. He told me there was a play ball there. And also where our sewer plant is, he said they used to go down there and play sometimes. I didn't know, and he went to the old school there in town for 3 years, but, you know, of course, I didn't go there. But he told me about going up there to school, and so he remembers quite a few things too that, you know, was prior to my time. But like he said, he was a boy and he got around more than us girls were allowed. And Redbridge was always a thing with all the boys would go to Redbridge fishing, including my boys when they were old enough to go. And I didn't think they were, but their dad said, yeah, they can. They would go down there, go fishing. I don't know, once in a while I'll see one of the little boys with his bike and a fishing pole, but not very often. But they used to always go down to, we call it Redbridge, and I think the reason they got Redbridge was due to the 1913 flood. Was that bridge red? That's what I had been told.
It was a big, tall iron
Red bridge.
rusty bridge.
And after they've always said Redbridge since that that's the story I had gotten. So I still call it Redbridge, even though it's not there.
Well, and the rail bridge that is just a few feet away was Black
Yeah.
Bridge.
That was Black Bridge.
Yep.
And that bridge is still there, the original one.
Mhm.
Well, I think there, on the other side of things, there was a few times we went skinny dipping down in Ludlow Creek.
I have a lot of times.
I guess boys did a lot more than us girls.
Will you please thank our guests? They've done a wonderful job. Thank you very much.
Thanks for having us.
It has just been most interesting to